It's nice to go to a matinee on a Sunday morning, right? Anyway, well, first of all, I am very honored to be here. First of all, to be able to see some of the old friends. Great to see you again. Thank you for coming out to help support this event. I'm very happy to see that the whole Films of Remembrance and all of the Remembrance events are expanding out to San Jose, because I think that the San Jose community deserves to be a part of anything that has to do with the Japanese American community. I have a lot of different connections on why this is such a great event for me. First of all, my grandparents, my uncles, and my father were all interned at Hart Mountain, and so I've always had that as part of my growing up experience and perspective. Also, too, as a journalist and as somebody now getting to host a show, I just feel like the whole Japanese American internment experience needs to always be told, and continuously told. Not just as like a history lesson, but also as something that's relevant today. As we all know that the issues that are brought up, and we had a show featuring Dale Minami talking about the legal battle to overturn decisions related to internment. And it's weird to think about the issues that we were talking about then are so relevant now, especially for Muslims and other groups. So I do feel as though that's an important element. And also too, when I came from KTVU to NBC Bay Area, I came because they said that I could start my own talk show, and that's why Asian Pacific America started. And they kind of wanted to make a newsmaker show, but for me, I was determined to make sure that the arts, the cultural elements were always a part of the show, because I really, truly believe that although you see a lot about politics and other kind of things that are emphasized on some of the shows, the arts and things like that are sometimes forgotten. And I feel as though they are the true personality. They tell a lot of the story of the community. I mean, there's an artistic element to the way people do things, and I think that it, in a sense, means really that no matter what you do, you are capable of being an artist. And I think that that's something that I really feel was, wow, this is a really great topic, because I do believe that, and to be able to do this part of the event made it even more significant for me.
She is really completely reinventing the idea of sculpture through what she's making. I don't think there's any label for it.
This furniture, which really boldly responded to the materials from which it was made, really sparked a revolution in the design possibilities for the American home.
His striking experiments in architecture helped launch what became the largest architecture firm in America.
The Akari Lantern is maybe the most ubiquitous sculpture on Earth. It's in more homes, shaping more spaces than any other thing.
These album covers back in the 50s really made jazz from America stand out.
Not only are all of these artworks immediately recognizable icons of post-war American art and design, but their second-generation Japanese American makers share a common bond beyond their ethnicity.
Well, first of all, Akira, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you to all of you for being here. And thank you too.
Yes. First of all, when I've seen this film more than once, and the first thing I want to say is that as a young person, when I was looking at it in terms of like a younger person thinking, what pride you generate. I mean, it's one thing to see people who have accomplished something. You profile people who have made impact on American culture. You have profiled people who, through design, that common denominator in design, have influenced America, American culture, and with it, lifted up Japanese American, the awareness of the Japanese American involvement in that. So that is a great accomplishment. What inspired you? What led you to make this kind of film, to use design as the common denominator and to be able to link it to the way you did?
Sure. So in all honesty, this film was based on an article that was written by Alexandra Lang, who's a writer in New York City. And she's a pretty prominent design and architecture critic. And she had gone to the Noguchi Museum in New York. And at the time, they had created an exhibition that focused on Noguchi's time in Poston. So it was, I believe it was the first time she was even aware that Noguchi spent time in Poston. And so she went out and started to investigate other Japanese American artists and their biographies, and started to realize that most of their stories just included basically a paragraph, or just a very small section on their time in camp. And she started to notice the ways in which they were exposed to the arts in camp, and the way that they spent a lot of time in camp creating art, and the way in which they took those influences and carried them with them for the rest of their lives. So she created this really great article, and she pitched it to KCET. KCET then found me and my department, which is the Watase Media Arts Center at the Japanese American National Museum, and we just began this great collaboration.
A light must have come on when you looked at that article and realized just how much depth and so much of a topic it could be.
Yeah, and she profiled so many other artists in that particular article. So this film could have been done in many different ways.
And for you and your vision, your own vision in terms of bringing it to the screen, what was your perspective in terms of when you looked at it and decided how to go about putting it together?
Well, honestly, I was scared because these are such great artists, right? They are, anybody that knows about art or art history knows these names. I was familiar with all of them beforehand, but I had never done a deep dive into any of their lives or their artwork. So the entire experience was very enlightening for me. Honestly, I felt like when I was done with it, after all the biographies and art history books I had read, I felt like I deserved to have a PhD in this particular subject.
Well, enlightening is a really good word, because I think, like I said, a lot of people might have known who these people are. I don't think many people, and unfortunately a lot of young Japanese Americans, were not aware of the depth that you're talking about, the extent to which they were responsible for the success of some of those things, those projects and things like that. Kimi, I think it was your cousin, I think, that was saying in the film that she felt like that Japanese American experience, the internment experience, was, in a sense, very, very influential and partially maybe responsible for the success of creating or shaping that artistic vision. Do you think that that's true?
That was a really interesting comment about her father. He was on his own from 18. He was just a kid, 18, 19 years old in St. Louis. And yeah, it's like growing up in the family, like, it's really interesting, for me to hear these interviews and get another kind of perspective. As a kid, we grew up and just knew that my uncle made buildings, and he made a planetarium that looked like an upside down chawan, right? The rice bowl. Oh, is that what he did? And then to stand back as an adult and realize everything that went into their careers. Really, really fascinating. And thank you, Akira, for an amazing job. I never heard of Fujita. I was amazed that all that visual things that I grew up with in the 60s, 70s, that was his work. It was so impressive.
Absolutely. In fact, like the Godfather designs and the buildings I've seen, not ever realizing that there was a Japanese-American connection to it. It was a real revelation to have that happen, and to be able to bring that revelation to people. I mean, that has to be the most rewarding thing for a filmmaker, don't you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. And as we were making it, I really wanted young people to see this, specifically college-age kids. I have a daughter that's she just started college, and so I wanted that generation to be able to see the greatness of what these young people at the time had accomplished.
I absolutely think that it should be required viewing. I really do. I mean, it's just such a historical and cultural kind of impact that it has on people. Kimi, one thing that I was wondering about what you're saying is, does it ever, I mean, your family appreciated what was happening there, but like without articles that were written, without a film like this, you realize how close you came to having that legacy and that historical impact lost.
That is exactly what I was thinking of watching. This is the second time I've seen the film. I really enjoyed it more the second time. And I've been giving this mantle of Obata family historian that was very close of that never happening. Yes. My grandmother happened to still be alive. My grandfather had passed. I said, well, I have time. I'm going to sit down with a tape recorder doing oral history with her. And then that, subsequently other things happened, but it was very close to being lost. And I know everybody here, every American has a story, and to get those family stories and figure out who are in those photographs, that's where it starts. And then all the connections are made, and to be part, as Japanese Americans growing up, and we've seen ourselves, treated as a minority and other. And now, if I can do a plug, Jiro Obata's art is at the Smithsonian American Art Museum on the mall. It's the exhibit there is until May, and then across the mall is the Jiro Obata Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. Very much a deep part of the American story, American culture, American art, and that Americans are able to recognize it, but those stories have to start from somewhere. They really do. They have to be preserved and researched and found and put into film as well.
I think that I thought was really significant was that as excellent as the profiles were, the way you were able to bring it back at the end of the film, it almost tied into the way if Issei's hadn't started telling Nisei's about what happened. They kept it to themselves for so long. It was that storytelling that kind of led to the steps that led to your film. And I felt like the way you tied that in at the end was really nice, because it could have been a great educational film for all people to learn about Japanese Americans and Japanese American impact. But by doing that, you allowed all Japanese Americans to also have that, feel like they have that investment, and they have that specific connection to this that's above and beyond the appreciation that everybody should have for it. So I congratulate you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, and it was a sunsetting, right? They were the ones that pulled the story out of the previous generations, and they're the ones that led the whole redress movement. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like this is a story that needs to be passed on to the next generations.
Before we wrap up, on a personal level, what's your next project? What are you working on now?
Well, that's top secret, so. But you know what? I want to plug Kimi's book, Topaz Moon. If you've not read it, that was one of my primary resources for this story, to understand Jiro Obata's story, and also, leading into Gyo's story. So definitely pick it up. It's a very moving, unexpectedly moving book. So I really love that.
Okay, that took away the plug I was going to help you make.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kenji Taguma. I'm the president of the Nichi Bei Foundation, editor-in-chief of the Nichi Bei Week. But we're proud to be here today to present day 2, we did this yesterday, of our 9th annual Films of Remembrance. This started in 2012 when we looked around and found there was a lot of these films being made, a lot of hard work by filmmakers, but no real venue to do it. And so we created a Films of Remembrance a day after the San Francisco Day of Remembrance commemoration. And so we're very proud to have presented more than 80 films throughout these past 8 years, including as part of the Asian Pacific Film Festival in Sacramento. and last November, we hosted Remembrance New York. And this is our first in San Jose. We hope to continue this tradition. We're very proud of and grateful for our partnership with the San Jose Buddhist Church Betsuin. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tommy.
Thank you all for coming here. What I'd like to do is just get right into the films. This section of our program is called Untold Stories. The first film up is Crystal City Pilgrimage. The film was made by Kondo, who I will be interviewing right after the film showing.
First official Crystal City Pilgrimage.
Don't it feel like a movie, teaching this girl how to waltz? Left feet she might have free, but you sure feels nice in my arms. Old folks sing an old song, playing the agreed upon key. My eyes are stuck on her eyes don't leave her feet. All this girl, no classroom, maybe this is more than a lot.
My parents entered camp childless, and all of a sudden they had 3 children in a concentration camp. But the point of my wanting to tell you about our family was that at least we were kept together. As unconstitutional and inhuman as what they did to us was, they kept us together. What the government is doing now, separating children of all ages, from babies to teenagers, from their parents, is inhumanity on steroids. So, the message is, stop repeating history. Never again is now.
Please welcome Alan Kondo, the maker of the film. Alan is a Sansei media activist working with Nikkei progressives in Los Angeles. And he's a retired financial planner as well. I think a number of other things, but we won't get into that right now. Originally from Toronto, Canada, he was a creative force at Visual Communications, the nation's premier Asian Pacific American media arts center. Alan, our theme today is, and I really believe your film fits into this, is Untold Stories. During the early 1970s, you were part of the staff that developed Visual Communications, the first Asian American multimedia and film organization in the nation. At the time, I would say everything about Asian American communities, their histories and struggles, were untold stories. Would you help us appreciate more fully the sort of political style of documentary work you did to give voice to Asian Americans during the movements in the 1970s? I think there's probably a lot of people here who don't know a whole lot about that.
Duane Kubo, who a lot of you know, as a local media activist, was one of the original people at Visual Communications as well. And what's encouraging and inspiring to me now is how the Japanese American and Asian American movement has evolved and developed over the years. Because back in the 1970s, when Duane and I were working at Visual Communications, our goal was to give our community a voice. Because we were kind of tired of other people telling our story and other people speaking for us. So our intention at Visual Communications was to learn from the community, put it together into films and videos and show it back to the community. And so our emphasis was to tell the history and culture of the community. And we had a great time doing it too. And then, later on, during the reparations movement, we were still involved at that time, and Duane, especially, he recorded a lot of the testimony at the hearings at the time from the community, and it was the first time that many people in the community had spoken about their experience in the camps and how they had suffered and how it had affected them for decades. And they had never, if many of them had not even told their own children. It was a cathartic experience. And at that time, the reparations movement was to get justice for ourselves. Now what's happening is kind of for me, I see it as another step upwards, where now the Japanese American community is fighting for the rights of other communities of color. And that's pretty amazing to me, and I'm very proud of our community.
Thank you, Alan. And the other thing I would like people to appreciate is part of the style of the film where people like Alan and our own Duane Kubo, I think he's here somewhere, we all know, is capturing a lot of the things as are happening right in the present. Because nobody else is going to do that. And so people are once again doing that, and I think it's very important to appreciate that and support that, because there's a lot of history still being made by our community, and as Ellen is saying, for others. So Crystal City was a very unique camp that is not usually discussed much in the standard narrative of the 10 government concentration camps. And so I thought this pilgrimage was very, very special. And I wish we had more time to talk about it. There's so many different aspects of this that you can see how this story helps us understand better what's happening right now with all the detention centers. There's something like, I believe, close to 70 other sites that Japanese Americans and others were detained in, beyond the 10 that we usually talk about. But I just wanted to ask Alan, what made you go to the pilgrimage? Why were you interested in going? And had you planned to capture this in the style like this that you used to doing?
No, for me it was a learning experience like everybody else, because I didn't know anything about the Peruvian American experience or the whole Japanese Latin experience. It was new to me. And I was astounded to hear that they had been kidnapped as children to be exchanged for prisoners of war that were Americans that were held in Japan. Even though these children had never been to Japan, didn't know anything about Japan, spoke mostly Spanish, and here they were going to be traded as prisoners of war. It was bizarre. It didn't make any sense. Completely unjust. And for me, it was a transformative experience, like it was for many of my friends who went. And I would encourage you to stick around for Emiko Omori's film. She goes more into depth, interviewing Kaz Naganuma and Hiroshi Shimizu and Hiroshi Fukuda about their stories, and I think you'll enjoy that very much.
So I just really wanted to thank Alan for coming all this way, and please give him a big round of applause. We have 2 films coming up, and they're about the WRA camp Minidoka, which is in Idaho.
The day you walk through that gate, you know you lost something. There are some things in your heart that you can't forget.
We were afraid. You look like the enemy, but we're American citizens.
Imagine someone saying, you need to go to jail because you're Japanese American.
What did I have to do with Japan? Nothing. My family wasn't doing anything wrong, but we were paying for it.
towers, searchlights, barbed wire fences around us. If they thought we were trying to escape, they had the right to shoot us.
We were stripped of our civil rights. We were stripped of everything. When that happens in America, that is a concentration camp.
My name is Sam Shoji. I'm 56 years old, and I spent 13 months in Puyallup and MINIDOKA.
So much of our family's story is preserved in that testimony.
The feeling of being pointed out as an enemy during a crucial period of my life and without a chance to defend myself caused many psychological wounds from which I feel I have never recovered.
Uncle Sam says it was this tragedy of crushing the emotional spirit of individuals as a result of confining innocent people in concentration camps.
In sort of hushed tones, my uncles and aunts, they called it camp.
But she didn't really talk to you about it, right?
Well, one thing she did mention is that she didn't want us to be bitter. We just didn't get the details.
Never really had a time where it felt really appropriate to talk about it.
So I think it's your generation that are the ones that are going to carry this forward.
So, Joseph is a Seattle-based activist, writer, who has been deeply involved in combating the current climate of hate, mongering against Muslims and immigrants as informed by his own identity, connecting him with the experience of Japanese Americans and the camps. He currently works at the Asian Counseling Referral Service in Seattle, Washington. You can please welcome Joseph. And all the way from Idaho, we have two special guests. Mia Russell. She also made an appearance in the film, I believe one of them, as the executive director of the Friends of MINIDOKA in Idaho. Prior to becoming the head of the Friends of MINIDOKA, Mia did interpretation and education work at the MINIDOKA site and even created a walking tour mobile map for the National Historic Site as part of her graduate work in applied historical research. So I know there are people here in San Jose, Japantown who might be interested in talking to you if you have some extra time to do an app for us, but I'll try to defend you from them. Next, right next to me is Hanako Watatsuki, a chief of interpretation and education for the MINIDOKA Historic Site. She is a historian, preservationist, and advocate for documenting the Japanese American incarceration experience. We are especially happy to have her here because this is sort of a homecoming for her. Right? I believe you grew up in the area, San Jose area, and some of you in the audience might know her family, or maybe some of your family members are here. So we're really, really proud to welcome you, San Jose. Behind us, we have Megumi. I'm not sure, can you see us? No, she can't. Okay, Megumi Nishikura, this is Tom Mizu, I'm moderating the panel, and your face is now being projected in front of this big audience here in San Jose, Japantown. So we want to welcome you. You are the director and producer of one of the films we just saw, MINIDOKA. She has been involved in addressing global and social issues through documentary storytelling, including climate change and biodiversity, 9/11 survivors, and the impact of the 2011 tsunami in northeastern Japan. Some of you may know her for award-winning independent film, Hafu, The Mixed Race Experience in Japan, screened theatrically through Japan and aired in the United States PBS. She produced Fall 7 Times, Get Up 8, The Japanese War Brides, which won numerous short documentary awards and aired globally, BBC. She currently works as a producer of Blue Chalk Media, so please welcome Megumi. Unfortunately, Rory Onyard, director and producer of Minidoka, an American concentration camp, which the film we first saw. He was unable to attend due to family illness, but you may see his impressive bio in the program. I think all of you would agree that both of these films were just beautifully done. Everything, the photography and the fades in and fade out, it was very, very moving. What I'd like to do now is join in a little discussion with our guests here. And our theme for this section is Untold Stories. And I was thinking about how these films both fit into that theme. And I'd like to start first with Megumi's film, Minidoka. Megumi, your film shows how young people who identify with Nikkei are still interested in learning about the camps and connecting to what is happening in their present lives in a similar way as did Sansei during the movements of the 1970s when they organized the first pilgrimages. What important untold story did you want the film to get across to audiences today? And are there particular people who you especially wanted to impact, especially right now? I'm sorry, I hope you can hear what I just asked you. Hold on a second. Wait, Joseph, do you want to?
I could fill in just a moment while you were working on that.
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to just say a huge thank you to everyone here in San Jose, and the Buddhist temple, Kenji and the Nichi Bei Foundation, and everybody for making this possible. But especially to Megumi for so her work to help take all these different emotions I was feeling, all these different experiences having, and turning it into such a well-crafted kind of narrative in just 13 minutes. In terms of one of the stories I think we also wanted to tell, that was thinking about some of the folks in the youngest generation and how we see more and more mixed-race Japanese Americans, and trying to see how they connect with their own Japanese American heritage. And in my case, this was an incredible way for me to learn about my own family's experience. Everything from, you saw some of the testimony from my great uncle Sam Shoji, and learning about how he's helped to fight for other communities beyond our own, and see how I can connect my own Japanese American heritage actually to the work that I do now in sort of the interracial, multicultural, so it's kind of immigrant solidarity work. And I'm really incredibly grateful though to Megumi for helping me to kind of tell this story. And I believe actually Megumi's able to also speak on this now. So Megumi, would you like to make a comment about your film and
Sure, can you guys hear me now? Or?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful, great. So I guess just trying to remember a little bit what the question was about, kind of telling this next generation stories. I mean, kind of a little bit of my backstory is that I am somebody who really values going to places of remembrance. I have been to the killing fields in Cambodia, to Vietnam. Obviously, I grew up in Japan, so I've been to Hiroshima, and have visited concentration camps in Europe. But I had never been to an internment camp here in the United States, and so I wanted to, and I absolutely believe in the tremendous power of being in a space, feeling the tragedy that occurred there, and at least for me personally, finding tremendous sense of kind of life affirmation that I have to do something so that these types of atrocities don't ever repeat themselves again. And so that's so much of what I wanted to convey in telling Joseph's story, and hearing that he had never visited a camp where his family had been incarcerated. All of those things came together, and so I was able to follow him and create this film. And I think really at the end of the day, my hope is that by watching this film, people who obviously who don't know much about the incarceration will get a sense, or at least kind of be able for, the 13 minutes, step in his shoes and feel what it must have felt like for him and his family members. And so that's what I hope that, this film connects with younger people today who might not have a chance to go there themselves.
One other comment on that too is that this also highlights the story of my great aunt Florence, or Tsudako, and a lot of the stories that get told now are folks who survived the camps, but it was really important for me also. I really appreciated Megumi including the part about her, because she died as a teenager before she could even come back, because of her disability she was sent to the Idaho State School. And it was in the process actually of learning about my family history and doing this documentary, I for the first time actually saw her death certificate in Idaho. I couldn't find it in any of the Minidoka records, but it actually was, since she died at the state school, the records were connected to that, and just realizing that I have an opportunity to I'll pass on that history and keep her memory alive.
So one thing I did find very moving in the film, you both were involved in making, was the comment you made about all of these different people who were directly impacted by the camps. They all have different stories. And I think that's a really important thing for us to remember, that those of us who've been involved in educating people about the wartime experience of Japanese Americans, sometimes we really want to make a simple story out of it, and then after a while it gets kind of rote. But there's so many different stories, and that's part of what I think these films help to uncover, especially as we learn more and more about it. More and more things come to the forefront, so I found that to be very moving. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the other film, and all of you can join in, because obviously they're deeply connected because they're both about Minidoka. First of all, because we unfortunately don't have the director for Minidoka, an American concentration camp, I was wondering if Mia and Hanako, if you had a connection with the film, that making of that film, and if you could say a little bit about what that connection was. And especially, you're really valuable to us today because both of you are deeply involved in actually using the actual campsite itself as a way to bring some of this history forward, and we saw it in both the films. So could you tell us a little bit about the making of this film and Mori's involvement and your involvement?
Sure, I'll let Hanako speak more to the Park Service side. The Friends of Minidoka did have a role in the making of this film. We actually were awarded a contract to help serve as sort of a community liaison. We wanted to make sure that the production of the film was done in a way that respected the community and individual storytellers' rights to, with their own comfort level of how much they actually wanted to share. So we made a lot of those introductions of from the filmmakers to the storytellers. And we also were scanning photos. So one of the remarks we received yesterday was that they hadn't seen a lot of the photos that we used, and that was intentional. You see a lot of the same government photos being used again and again and again because those are the official record. So we actually went out and digitized private personal collections in people's homes and tried to use those as much as we could.
Yeah, and I guess our role as the National Park Service is that we funded this. And this is actually our park orientation film. So it's actually the longest orientation film in the Park Service. We actually had to fight for every minute of it, because originally it was supposed to be 22 minutes long, and we got it to 30 minutes. Because, with the storyline, a lot of people who are visiting the site may not have any understanding of what actually occurred out there. So we had to create a film that's going to put everything into context so people can understand. And also, gain, hopefully, empathy by the end of it, because that's the ultimate goal of interpretation. So we were heavily involved with, the script, approving it and everything, and just making sure it all worked out. And so now it's actually available to be seen at the Minidoka National Historic Site, as we just opened up the News Visitor Center in the Park Service yesterday at 11 o'clock. So, and then we came out.
This question actually is addressed to all of you here, including Megumi. But maybe we can start with Mia and Hanako, since Hanako has the microphone. There's been a considerable number of films about the World War II Nikkei incarceration. So what made these two films different, you think, and important to show now? What things are in it that you think were really important that you want people to see that maybe they're not that familiar with?
Yeah, well, with the park film, we can't be too political about stuff, but we do find a way to kind of bring things up to current events. which I think is really important because a lot of people, you know, they're going to just look at this saying, hey, this happened in the past and that's it. And that's why it was really important for us to find actually the color images. There were 3 of them that you saw. Because a lot of people, when they look at black and white photos, it's like, oh, that's out of, you know, out of sight, out of mind. But when they see it in color, they're like, holy cow, this is recent. And so it's just trying to get people to understand that, you know, in a sense, sometimes, you know, history repeats itself, it rhymes, right? And it's to get people to recognize it and to step back and think about, hey, what do they want to do as citizens and what it means to be an American citizen.
I would say, to kind of fill in for the filmmakers who couldn't be here today, I know it was important for them and for the National Park Service to tell the story almost entirely through the voices of the survivors themselves. Initially the plan was to not have any narration at all, and they finally did just a little bit here and there to sort of tie the story together, and it helped that George Takei was the narrator there to ease their pains there.
Megumi, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think what makes, you know, my film or the film Joseph and I worked on together unique is that, you know, I really wanted to tell as cinematic of a story as possible. I'm eternally grateful for the, you know, many documentaries that have preceded this film and the first, you know, person testimonials that we have from the survivors. But I think this also kind of lends to the earlier question, is like, we are at this point in time where, you know, many of that people who experience the camp directly are passing on, and I think it is up to the next generation to carry it forward. And so, you know, that's kind of where the unique angle of this story is, really looking at the next generation. You know, how do we continue these stories? How do we continue so that these things don't happen again? And that's what I hope it will achieve.
And something I'll add on that too is I really appreciated how Megumi took all this material and crafted it into something I think so effective in terms of storytelling and visuals. And something I was also just so grateful that I think the final product didn't shy away from is being overly political and making a statement, not trying to take this out of a larger historical and political context. And being very explicit about pointing out that somebody from you know, the current president's campaign, you know, made an explicit reference to Japanese American incarceration as a precedent for how we treat others, and looking at, you know, that was a state representative, Covarrubias in Colorado, who made that incredibly ignorant racist statement. You know, and actually how I got connected. And it actually kind of goes back to how I got connected actually with Megumi and also Mia and Hanako. You know, actually Mia almost deserves a credit in this film as well for the number of times she appears in it. But part of the reason we got connected was because it was actually dealing with a very incredibly racist and ignorant professor in Eastern Washington who was using a lot of this ahistorical and ignorant racist ideas to actually try and misinform his students in his political science class in Eastern Washington, and we ended up kind of putting him on blast on social media, and George Takei ended up reposting it. We got all these very, very upset calls going to the school, and they eventually reached out to us and, you know, asked to have a talk with us. We brought American Muslim and Japanese American leaders from the local community together to address the harm. And with all this writing, that's how I got connected with Megumi. And I was actually an intern for the Council on American Islamic Relations at that time. So the film, I think something that's unique about it is following kind of the mixed race Yonsei's perspective, but also not shying away from the political nature of how this documentary even came to be. And that's something that I think is just really, really important to me. As in my current work at Asian Counseling Referral Service, for example, we're looking to work on legislation that will end private detention, for example, in our state, fight back against the Geo Corporation that's trying to profit off of the detention exploitation of mostly black and brown bodies that they're imprisoning. And so that's really something though that I'm just incredibly grateful to Megumi and everyone for in making this film.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do, unfortunately we have so many films, we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to wrap it up, but I want to give all of you a chance to say some last comments. And I believe there would be a chance to talk to you further if you're willing to be here, maybe where the food is being served, or is that possible out there? Okay, good. So please go ahead.
I'd just like to speak about next steps. Hanko mentioned the film. This film will now live in the Visitor Center for Minidoka National Historic Site, so folks that are coming to visit will get to view it there and just sort of understand the broad overview before they understand sort of the deeper history at the site itself. But Friends of Minidoka was so inspired by the work of North Shore Productions and by all of the wonderful interviews that they were capturing. And there are so many stories that couldn't be told in 30 minutes. And so we've actually received a grant from the National Park Service as well as a couple of other foundations, and we're making a 1-hour version for public television. It will be broadcast nationally. We're also producing a 7th through 12th grade educational curriculum, which will be free online, available for teachers nationwide. So we are fundraising the final $30,000 to make that project happen, which is our final 10%. So if anyone is interested in sort of the next phase of that project, please speak to me.
I don't really have much to say other than thanks Mia for helping me out through the last few years, because it's just been a crazy ride this whole last 3 years that I've been here at Minidoka National Historic Site, getting our visitor center up and running. It took us 19 years to do that, and I was on actually the board of the Friends of Minidoka for 12 years, so I don't know what's next. I feel like I need to retire, so I'm just really tired, so I apologize. I don't have anything more to add. I guess I'll pass it back to.
Yeah, I was going to just ask Megumi if you'd like to say anything. We're wrapping up right now.
I just want to say thank you for the Nichi Bei Foundation and for everyone who came today. I mean, it's great to be able to share this film, and I think we initially released this film last year on the Day of Remembrance with Time magazine, but to be able to actually show it in front of an audience and to see your reactions, and you can always find me online and send me questions or emails or anything, and then I'm sure Joseph will be happy to talk to you afterwards as well. So just thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. Can we please give a round of applause?
Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Duane Kubo, who everybody knows is the founder of J-Town TV, but before that, founder of Visual Communications, which is the oldest Asian American film video organization. And he also was a founder of the Silicon Valley, what is now Silicon Valley Asian Pacific Film Festival. So without further ado, let me introduce Duane.
Thanks, Cindy. And thank you all for coming out. It's so great that you could come out and support Asian American films, as a remembrance, and San Jose Betsuin. We're going to continue with the artistic interpretations of the camp experience. I don't know if you were here for the last session. That music interpretation was just great. I've been waiting for a long time to hear No. But now we have filmmakers that are going to interpret the camp experience. And this first film is really, you might say it's an experimental film. Sean Morigito Ogara is an experimental avant-garde filmmaker. He's been doing this for quite some time. I've known of his name for many, many years, since the mid-70s. And he's been involved in the community, making films, and I think stretching the medium for many, many years. So today we're going to see his latest work called TOPAZ, 10 Meditations. And it's a silent film. So just warn you ahead of time, kind of turn off your phones and kind of listen for or try to take in the visuals. And after his first film, we'll have him come up and talk about Then after that, we're going to go on and screen KIKAN, the homecoming, and I think we have several of the actors here from the film, and we'll talk about the making of that film and what it means today in the post-Crazy Rich Asians world. So, without further ado, let me start. Thank you.
That was really beautiful. Thank you. I don't know many Japanese American, Asian American filmmakers that work in kind of an experimental medium, with a cutting edge and making full use of cinema. Johnny's been doing this for many years. I understand as early as 1976, he was scratching film emulsion with barbed wire to bring in the Japanese concentration camp experience to film in a literal way. So I mean, that was back in 1976. I've known Sean for many years, and I actually only met him about 5 minutes ago, which is kind of amazing. Thank you very much for your work over the years. It's really amazing.
Well, I'm kind of honored to be on the same stage as Dwayne Kubo. I've been following your career for many years. Hito Hata, Cruising J-Town, these wonderful 16mm films, 70s. Gitra publication, just
thanks, Sean. This is all about Sean and his work at TOPAZ, so let's talk about that. But it is really different than I think the films we saw this morning, which were documentaries and a lot of factual stuff, a lot of things people didn't know about. But this, without any words, said quite a bit. I wanted to ask Sean, so how is it about this form of filmmaking that brings out more the concentration camp experience of our community? What is it about this type of thing?
I wanted to go beyond the typical documentary, beyond archival footage and interviews. Try to approach the concentration camp experience through alternative modes of cinema, trying to reach a different level of consciousness about camp experience.
So as I said, you've been doing this for quite some time. Can you just tell us about your development as a filmmaker starting in the 70s and up to now?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I would see there were two formative filmmaking figures in my life, and I would credit those figures with influencing my filmmaking. And I'd say those two people were my mother and my aunt. My mother had a way of looking at the world in a different way. She's very artistic. Sadly, she died about 28 years ago. And my aunt, Mae Sanada, she worked at KRON TV back in the 60s, then KGLA in Los Angeles, and then Austin. And she helped me develop sort of the hardware aspect, learning 16mm film making, cutting, editing, cementing, splicing, and so fusing those two together.
Things digital students today don't know anything about.
Right. Yeah, so two Nisei women in my life they were my film school. So yeah.
That's great. So where did you get the stories that you were telling through?
Well, this one I was born in Berkeley. I grew up in Berkeley in my early years, and I lived in a neighborhood with many Issei residents who were formerly incarcerated at TOPAZ. And my mother would invite them over. I'd be between the ages of 5 to 7, and she'd invite them over for tea and for pie and coffee, and I would be assisting. I'd be 5 years old, and I'd have a little tray of senbei, and I'd be setting it out and helping, and loved listening to the conversations. I couldn't understand it very well. They're speaking Japanese. My mother would translate for me, but she would tell me these stories about how they often kept speaking about dust and wind in Utah. I didn't hear the word topaz at the time, but my mother said it's a camp like Heart Mountain, and I knew about Heart Mountain because my mother was born in Wyoming and grew up in Wyoming. So those stories were very prominent growing up. And at the age of 7, my father ran out on the family, and the family unit disintegrated. And I found myself at age 7 on a train bound for Utah. And I ended up in Utah at age 7, initially at my uncle's residence. He was formerly of the 442nd. And I found it a very miserable time in my life. I just was crying, yearned for the Bay Area, just the smell of the sea, the ocean, the beauty of the Bay Area. It felt like home. I just wanted to return to home. And I ran away a few times. My uncle, he was a fossil and rock hunter, and ironically, he took me on a trip. This is my first month in Utah, to Delta, Utah, which is where TOPAZ is located. So I experienced a sense of desolation at 7. So the story of TOPAZ always spoke to me, especially about those who were incarcerated at a young age, age 7. The poetry was all written by me, that I tried to relate with the animated images.
That's perfect. That was my next question. Who wrote the poetry? But that is your own work.
Right. Those are my own words. I spent about 1.5 years writing those poems. It was a daily ritual to try to rework the words, and it didn't quite fit, so I'd rework them and re-edit, rework them. Yeah. It's kind of a long process, along with animation, which, as you know, 1 second of animation requires 24 individual frames. So if you have 1 minute of animation, it requires 1,440 individual frames of the word. So, yeah.
And I was just going to ask about the technical background too. But so, Sean, what is your background for this type of filmmaking? What kind of skills do you need to incorporate into this kind of work?
Just trying to be receptive to when you have an idea, to try to incorporate it into your filmmaking. It's sort of a trial and error process. Some things work, some things don't. For example, the taco, the octopus, my mom bought me a jar, an octopus jar, in formaldehyde when I was about 5. And many people have stuffed animals by their beds. I had taco on my head every night, and sort of a sense of comfort, a bizarre comfort, but nevertheless. And so I felt motivated to have that in there. Initially, I did have a crab, but the crab began to spoil under about 12 hours of hot lambs, and the smell was just so strong, I just couldn't continue that.
So you also constructed like the butterfly?
Right, but actually I brought
the skills, I think.
Yeah, I brought the butterfly with me. Show and tell. Here's the crane that opens it. It's articulated, so you move the wings one frame at a time. The barbed wire that you see that in bloom, it's actually quite small. This is what I'm working with. It's very tiny, so I used pruning shears.
And you shot all those images yourself as well?
Yes, I did. Yeah. I don't have a studio, so what I had to do every day was remove my mattress, place it against the wall, take the frames down, and then set up my mini studio. And then at the end of the day, usually I would collapse and lay on the floor and then try to reassemble the mattress the next day. But here's
American filmmaking.
Yeah. Here's the butterfly. It has wires underneath, and the reason I kept one side unpainted is because I wanted to convey the sense of scraps. That scraps were used in camp to create beauty, to create art, and so one side of the butterfly still remains cardboard. And if you look, there's tears here, and even on the side that's supposed to be beautiful, there's tears within the wing. But yeah, I would animate it one frame at a time, and you would do this, and sequentially it would produce motion. So, yeah.
That's great. People didn't know how animation was made. So digital animation is really the same as film. You're just going 24 frames with one frame at a time.
Right. I used to use 16 millimeter and then 35 millimeter, and then made that transition to digital cameras. There's actually 4 cameras I used. Let's see, 2 Nikons, 1 Canon, and 1 Sony. You find with stop motion animation, unlike shooting stills or live action, that when you have a camera on for many hours, the sensors begin to overheat and things begin to break down. So.
Sounds good. So when one creates this type of creative work, where is it shown?
I had it shown at the Zantz Media Center in Berkeley. It's a nice screening facility. And then I used to have screenings at NADA, which is now CAM, Center for Asian American Media, and then the San Francisco Cinematheque, which is focused on the avant-garde, alternative cinema, fine art cinema. So, yeah, those are locations.
But this type of filmmaking is still considered alternative, underground, avant-garde.
Right. I mean, it is considered. I thought that's why I pursued it, because I thought, for a marginalized or once marginalized people, it would be nice as a metaphor to use a marginalized form of cinema, and I just find that I just feel that I feel the rhythms of this form more than, say, the documentary form. Yeah.
It certainly takes a lot of different skills, and Sean has it.
And I know it can often make an audience feel uncomfortable to experience total silence, no musical accompaniment, and I kind of think that's kind of nice sometimes, just to feel something different. That difference is okay, that should be celebrated. So
that's great. So I read that this is really wrapping up your TOPAZ series. What are you working on now, or what's coming up?
The final installment will be a feature-length animated film. The focus will be on the water dragon figure, and I'm sort of bracing myself because I know it will probably be the most challenging of my films for a viewer, because it could be a minimum of 40 minutes of relentless imagery, that with no narratives. But I'm looking forward to it, and I hope some of us who are here, if they like this, they will see the future. So.
And actually, I invited Sean to participate in the project that the Japanese American Museum of San Jose is running with Tom Yusu and Susan Hayase. They're doing an augmented reality vision of Japantown. And they're seeking artists right now. And I think your work would fit right in with what's going on here.
Thank you.
It would be great. That's that picture I gave you.
I should just add one little thing. The reference to Nori, those images that you see, the yellow, all those are actually close-ups of a strip of Nori. And if you actually hold it to the sun, you'll see some wonderful colors. But you often spend most of the time rolling Nori. But yeah, try holding it up to the sun or putting it under a microscope, and you'll see some wonderful textures.
Great. Do we have a few minutes still? I thought maybe we could get a question from the audience, but is that pretty much it? Any questions from the audience? I know you guys, we haven't had much time. Yes.
What's part one?
Oh, part one was more for children. It was called Kairu, to return, and it's a 2-minute short, and it focuses on the water dragon. So the water dragon sort of is the thread that is through all films. So, yeah.
All right, so let's thank Sean for coming down here. Experience through this short film, thanks to all of his actors. So let's give them all a hand. And as I said, we know Chizu because she comes down to San Jose quite often to speak of her experiences. Miyoko because she was in Isai Sushi, which was screened during the Silicon Valley Asian Film Festival about 34 years ago. Ryan was in Luis Valdez's Valley of the Heart, which played at the San Jose stage. Ken, I've seen you in a number of those, and man, I don't know your work, but great job on the cinematography. So let me, you have the mic, so let me just start with you. I know just a little bit of your background, but you weren't always a cinematographer. In fact, I think you were more a person in the community in San Francisco, a friend of Kerwin Burke's, and then you started really exercising your artistic bent.
Well, I'm not from San Francisco. I don't live in San Francisco. I'm a valley boy, originally from Fresno, and I live in Roseville now. And until 2011, I had never done anything other than home video. So through the power of Facebook, I actually was cast in Kebi Film's first feature, which was Infinity and Joshi Run. I was Phil Nakamura, one of the Three Stooges. If you've seen the movie, you know what the Three Stooges are. And from there, I'm a techie kind of guy, so I I bought a camera, I bought more cameras, and eventually the Kimi Films has an award-winning web series called Gold Mountain. So go to KimiFilms.com, check out Gold Mountain. We have 2 seasons there. First season won something like 22 awards in film festivals. I don't know if this is some sort of natural progression for me, but I have no background in film or art or anything before 2011.
So what that means is it really takes a good eye, because I have to compliment Ben on some of those shots. For example, Jimmy Obata walking up the street in San Francisco, that says it all for me in San Francisco, with Clay Tower in the background under that shot. Man, that's a cinematographer's dream. So great job showing off the city as well as capturing the image.
A lot of the credit goes to people who scouted locations. So we have a network or actually, Kerwin Burke, who's our producer, director, has a network of people that he knows in the city, and they have ideas for locations. So they spend a lot of time.
And he's a local, he knows the city, and he certainly shows it off in his film. So the other 4 are actors, and you just don't see 4 Asian American actors together in any locale, so this is really great that they would come down to San Jose. Let me just ask all of them, what did this film mean to them in terms of their own acting career, and how it helps in your own development? What did it mean to you to be in the film? So we can pass this one down.
Let's start with the professionals. I just happened to be Kerwin's friend. I got roped into these roles. I've been in one of the other ones too. But they're just a lark. And anyway, I think Kerwin has typecast me very accurately.
She has that look of,
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, I retired, so my career's over.
It was an honor to be a part of this film. Not so much because of my acting career, but that my family was interned at Heart Mountain, and during the stills at the end of the film, still photos, my mother passed away that month. And she was one of the last of the Issei's, and she died at 105 years old. So the dress that I wore in the stills was my mother's dress. So the film had very strong meaning for me. Thank you.
Yes, as an actor, I spent a lot of time playing roles that don't speak to me at all, actually, or that I actually can't, or have a hard time identifying with. And that's part of the challenge as an actor, but when a role comes along in a film or a project that actually does speak to you and you do identify with and actually speaks very loudly to you, it is a truly different experience overall. It's more than just a gig, it's more than just a job, it's more than just acting in a film. It's the retelling of our story. And that has been immensely meaningful for me. Wanting to not only do this work, but also to do this work with and for my own community. So I have to thank Kerwin, again, who's not here, but I have to thank Kerwin for giving all of us this opportunity to tell this story, to do so together. And it'd be great if Hollywood would pay a lot of money to tell this story, but then they would be telling the story, and not us. So it was incredibly powerful for all of us to be telling the story together. A Japanese-American cast, Japanese-American crew. It was something that I'll never forget.
So this was actually my first time acting, and I thank Ryan and Kerwin, they were in the room when I did the auditions and the first few kind of test shots. and they really helped me out as far as what kind of face to have on and how to talk. It was really interesting. So if you guys have never acted out there, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. And I'm definitely hooked.
We had to teach you how to die.
Yeah,
which is kind of
so they look like I died. So I felt very comfortable. I knew Ryan actually, so Ryan brought me onto this film. He sent an email last out, and I was the only one that was dumb enough? No, smart enough. Yeah.
He was available.
Opportunity, yeah. Most free person. And it felt really comfortable because I knew you, so I felt like I could die in your arms. But as far as I'm Japanese American, I'm Nisei, which is, it's derived off of number 2, Ni in Japanese, so second generation. So my parents came to America after the war, so I kind of can relate to how a Nisei in the 1940s might have felt, with the parents being from Japan and being very proud of being Japanese, and me being American, feeling very proud of being both Japanese and American, and having my parents stuck in a concentration camp while the government was asking me to go fight for the United States. And I don't know what I would have done, and I wouldn't have ever thought about those questions if it weren't for actually being a part of this film. So I really thank Ben and Kehlani and Kerwin and Ryan. Thanks so much for thinking of me for this film. I had a great time. It was a great learning experience.
And your daughter.
Yes, my daughter. This is her 50th film, her first film, and it was right after she started walking, so she did a great job. One shot, I think it was.
First take.
So I wanted to ask the actors, now that we're in the post-Crazy Rich Asians era, have things changed for Asian American actors? We see a lot more happening on TV this year. We see more films coming out with Asian American actors in them, but have we made a breakthrough? Are we on the renaissance that Ryan Taguma has written about?
That's a good question. I would actually say that yes, things are changing. I don't know that it's necessarily we can say that it's just Crazy Rich Asians. That was the thing that sparked everything. I think it was actually it's from decades of work from not just people in the industry, but people in the community pushing the industry forward to trying to get more people, not just actors, but more people into production, more people into directing, more people into this, actually working at the studios and working in Hollywood. So decades and decades of that has actually led to, allowed for Crazy Rich Asians to even happen. And but Crazy Rich Asians was just one project in a milieu of a bunch of different projects that were all happening around the same time. So you have Fresh Off the Boat on television. You have Aziz Ansari had his own show for a little while. John Cho was doing great things. Everybody, there was a lot of things all happening at once. And I think we all like to point at Crazy Rich Asians because it's very easy to point at that because it was very big. But there was so much work being done by so many different people across the industry, and they've been doing it for so many years. And actually, also community advocates and activists who have been pushing for more representation in Hollywood for decades. I think they're the ones who really have been pushing this forward. So I think yes, things are changing. Crazy Rich Asians helped, but I wouldn't say that it was the sole reason why things are changing.
So there are a number of, I saw several young people who are interested in acting careers, and I wanted to see if any of you could give them any advice on how to get started. Chizu, you've been thrown into these roles. You just have to know the director. Is that?
It's the people you know, right?
At least if you're Asian American, how about the rest of you?
In reference to the previous question, so change is slow. I do a lot of stage work, And what we're up against as people of color, Asians specifically, is tradition. So most theatrical companies still want to stay traditional if they can. They're getting a lot of pressure because of the whole diversity inclusion pressure. But I hate to be cynical, but change is slow, and I don't think we're going to see any major changes for many, many, many years to come.
Yeah, and sort of building off that and answering your other question, I think the main thing to do for anybody who is wanting to get into film, especially for Asian Americans, especially for actors of color, is to do work with your community. And I think that's where change comes from as well. I think if we keep waiting for Hollywood or whoever to give us roles or to give us opportunities, we're gonna be waiting forever. And that's, I think that's also advice for young actors. Like, if you just wait for Hollywood to give you a role, you'll never get it. You almost have to write it yourself. You have to direct it yourself. You've got to produce it yourself. You've got to get together with friends, get together with your community, get together with, you know, like-minded people and make it, and then watch it, right? And like, don't just, you know, we gotta sort of stop relying on these big budget films for our entertainment and start coming to film festivals like this, and really paying attention to small film festivals and to independent film and supporting locally made projects, you know, locally made web series, locally made documentaries. That's where I think change will happen, is if we you know, we pay for these with our community money, we fundraise with the community. I think that's the key in my opinion.
Thank you. And I really think that the stories have to come out of the community. We know the stories. We've heard them. We know people that were involved in those events. And so we need to write them up so that we can employ many people behind these films. I was also going to ask Ben, I don't know if you know, has the Asian American presence behind the camera changed over the last few years? I think there were always a certain amount of technicians involved in the film industry, but has that become more so now? Is it more of a lucrative? For example, when I told my parents I was going to film school, they said, "What the?" It's like, you know, I thought you were going to become a dentist. And it was just very odd, an odd profession. So
I am not sure. I'm not sure.
Chizu has something to say.
Kerwin would really like to make this into a regular feature-length film, and
so this is still a work in progress.
That's what I understand.
So
anyway, well, maybe Ben knows better, but
I would never dare to know better than you, Chizu.
but anyway, you know, it's like a matter of money and things like that. So yeah.
So are we close to the end of the questioning?
I think we are. Yeah.
Okay, so I didn't mean to cut it off. I just had 3 points three things I wanted to mention. First of all, I have friends who know that I do make films, and many of them don't show up. They go, "Well, what's it about?" And I said, well, for them, Caucasian, so I don't say it's about the camps. I say it's a war story. It's a love story. In terms of Infinity, Chashi Ramen, our previous film, it's not about Japantown, really. It's about relationships and love. So there are, to get them interested, I have to describe it in terms which would interest them more than saying, "Oh, it's about the camps," and then just I sort of glaze over. But it's not really about camps. It's a war story and it's a love story. Second point, going back to what Chizu said, if you notice the whole middle part of the film is just a photo montage. So one of the things we need to do is get funding to finish that portion. Actually, I don't really know how much that is. It varies from conversation to conversation, but our director was talking about blowing up a winery or something like that. So that, if you want to help us blow up a winery, please let me know and we'll try to get together. And then the final thing, in that photo montage, there's an Easter egg. Okay, well, it's just a little bit out of place, and I don't know if anybody understood it. Ask about it later.
Okay, so Chizu, Miyoko, Ken, Brian, and Ben, would you help me thank them for coming down here? Thank you very much.
The theme for this final panel is Lessons for Today, and I think it's fitting that after seeing a full day of different types of films, that the final panel would be lessons. Now I know that these will not be final lessons that we're going to be chiseling in stone, because I think as time goes by and our history starts to open like a flower, there are a lot of stories and ideas and feelings and concepts that have emerged that were not possible during the time of the camps, and they weren't possible during the resettlement period, and they weren't possible during the redress movement. So I think that there are a lot of new ways of looking at things that are coming out now, and I think this is really a transitional period. So I'd like to have everybody really think about how we are really in a transitional period, and think about what that means for you and your family stories, but also about what your community is doing and what's going on in the world. So today we are very fortunate. We're going to be seeing 3 films. The first film we're going to be seeing is called Resettled Roots, and it's an historical documentary. The second film is the history of Two for Solidarity, and the third film is Then Becoming Now.
TOPAZ. Yay, TOPAZ. And Tuli Lake. Wow. A lot of people from Tuli Lake. Okay. Thank you very much.
I don't think anyone at first thought of that we would ever be gathered up and put into camps.
Military authority determined that citizens and aliens alike would have to move. Neither the Army nor the War Relocation Authority relished the idea of taking men, women, and children from their homes, their shops, and their farms. So the military and civilian agencies alike determined to do the job as a democracy should, with real consideration for the people involved.
It was a shock because when the buses went in through the gates, there were soldiers and barbed wire fences everywhere.
The moment you went into one of these stalls, there was just smell of horses and manure, and they had 4 cots led side by side. And that was our home for May, April through August.
As time starts to pass, while the Japanese Americans are in the camps, increasingly it becomes more and more untenable for the U.S. government to justify incarcerating these people for longer and longer periods of time. And so what they end up doing is starting to distribute a questionnaire to everybody who is in the camps. Many people call this the loyalty oath questionnaire. If you had answered yes, yes, then you were eligible to begin the search for work and to apply for leave clearance.
A short time ago, they were in a relocation center. Now they're in the Middle West, renewing their touch with the world they left a year earlier. They're facing life in a new community with confidence, together.
Chicago was probably one of the big cities that is full of these almost every kind of job.
Back in 51 and 52, people could reject your application to rent based on race.
I remember going to the bathroom and you could hear the rats in the wall.
It was a roach-infested ghetto building.
Oh my gosh. It's just horrible.
A lot of times people, they look at the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II and they think that the entire thing started with Pearl Harbor. The reality is that the Japanese were a precarious population from even before that period of time.
It's the experience of one group at one period of time, but there are things in there that are universal, and there are things that are important to capture because history repeats itself.
I'm looking at these beautiful cranes and I feel like these are wings of hope on these cranes, a message that the children and the families will get, that there are people on the outside who care.
Thank you for standing in solidarity with our community and joining our voices to push back and say no more concentration camps.
There's more than 1 million documented Asian Americans live in this country without having proper, I would say, right.
This is about survival. And we are not supposed to be asking and seeking survival in a country that says we are a melting pot. If something needs to be melted, we need to melt the ice.
The sun shines practically every day in the year, with a cool breeze from the Gulf in the evening. This is the perimeter, over which armed guards kept a 24-hour watch. At night, the illumination from the lights along the top of this fence was visible almost to the Mexican border.
I'm so pleased to see Emiko. I've admired Emiko for such a long time. She's such an accomplished filmmaker. She was the director of both the films that you just saw, then becoming now in Sudu for Solidarity History. She's an award-winning cinematographer and documentary film director. I think one of the films that she's most famous for among Japanese Americans is Rabbit in the Moon. In 1991, she wrote and directed the highly acclaimed drama Hot Summer Winds, a co-production of American Playhouse and KCET based on 2 short stories by Hisaya Yamamoto. Her feature-length documentary, Rabbit in the Moon, won the Best Documentary Cinematography Award at the 1999 Sundance Film Festival and a National Emmy Award after it was broadcast on PBS that year. With Wendy Slick, she co-produced and directed Passion and Power, The Technology of Orgasm in 2008. And in 2010, she directed Ed Hardy, Tattoo the World. Emiko is one of the first camera women to work in news documentaries, and she began her career at KQED in San Francisco in 1968. And just fairly recently, she's been elected to the Academy of Motion Pictures. Something that was long overdue and only instigated by the Oscars So White campaign. So Emiko is representing Asian Americans on that panel. Our other panelists are Kaz Nakanuma, a Japanese Peruvian and graphic designer in the San Francisco Bay Area. Also Hiroshi Shimizu, who's president of the Tui Lake Committee and the Japanese American National Library. And Hiroshi Shikuda is the president of the Kondo Church of San Francisco Board. And we are so, also Hiroshi Shimizu and Kaz Nakanuma are active on the Crystal City Pilgrimage Committee. So this is a really exciting panel, and I think the films were very moving. And I want to ask Emiko, can you talk a little bit about why you made these films, and what were the challenges? They're similar in some ways, but very different also. So could you comment on those?
Well, the history of Tsuru was, for the organization, now that we've become an organization, Tsuru for Solidarity, and that's that we were trying to explain who we were and what we were doing, and it was just sort of easier to make a documentary. And also because everything had happened so quickly, and it's now become a national movement. And so to me, that is, a lot of people contributed to that film because I was not at every protest. So what's been very wonderful about this is that people are just donating whatever footage they have and allowing people to use it rights free. And so I think you saw earlier Alan Kondo's film about, that was a Crystal City pilgrimage. And then the second film, I was asked by KALW, the Oracle, Laura Flynn. They had gotten a grant from the California Civil Liberties Fund and were tasked with making a short documentary to be on their website. And I said, well, sure. I mean, I know a lot about the camps. There should be a snap. Well, you try to squeeze a ginormous story into a short period of time. That's the challenge. And luckily, I met these three. Well, actually, I knew them beforehand, but we were all on that protest to Crystal City and Dili. And I did feel it was very important to bring it to the present, that this was not just something in the past, and that what we were doing today. So that was kind of the perfect sort of beginning, middle, and end to this very short documentary. Because when you make things for the web, you want to try to keep it under a certain amount of time, but this is about as short as I could make this one. And of course, there were many other stories, just the way you saw in the film before this, that didn't make it. But they were so generous to share their stories. So that's how this one, the second one, came around. And it'll be on a KLW website. As soon as we make some corrections, as you might have noticed, there was a missing ID at the beginning, and it appeared later on under the wrong person. So we had to correct that. So that's how that came about.
That's great. I think it was so compelling because they were all little tiny kids in Crystal City and still know each other and are friends today. And I think that's such a moving story. And I was wondering if Hiroshi and Kaz, if you could talk about, do you remember when you first talked to each other about your experience at Crystal City, or was it something that you didn't talk about until you were adults, or can you talk about that?
The first memory I have of Hiroshi was that my parents had ordered a pair of those metal skates from Sears and Roebuck, and I was only 3, and so I wasn't really ready for them. And Hiroshi, who was a year and a half older than me, I got a hold of him, and man, he was skating up and down the street. I was so envious of his skill to do that. That was my first memory of Hiroshi, and we were in that class together. And I'm sure Kaz was in that class, although he wasn't in the photo. Since his sister was the teacher, he must have been in class. Maybe he was sick that day. Yeah. But yeah, so we did play together in Crystal City, and then when we all arrived in San Francisco after we were released, I lived across the street from Kaz, and Hiroshi lived at the church, which was right around the corner. And so we had the proximity, and then the Troop 58 began soon after that. And we were just in the same group.
As far as Crystal City was concerned, I was so young, I don't recall very many things. One thing that I simply remember was that I was with you, I think, and I'm not sure who it was, but we called it a rattlesnake. You remember that?
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't catch it, but I was interested. Gee, what is that? And I do remember the pool. There's a swimming pool. Well, it was actually a reservoir that was converted or used as a swimming pool. Texas is pretty hot, very hot, and so the swimming pool was a good functional recreation, and Kazuo could probably tell you more, because there was one tragic accident with 2 Peruvian girls, so he could elaborate more on that. And anyway, coming out of camp, I was in camp for almost 6 years, so it was interesting because the war had ended in 45, and all of us were not released until 47. I think all of us were going to be deported, right? Yeah. Our families were going to be deported, and Wayne Collins helped to delay any action. And I think eventually in 47, the government realized, oh, geez, the war's been over for 2 years. So they finally released us. And going back into San Francisco society or community, it was really different because Japantown, San Francisco, was a thriving community. We had everything within the community. It's not like what it is today. Today, we have really fine new churches, that are finely designed. However, in the old days, we didn't have the modern churches or as such, but we had the community. Everyone lived within the community. There were thousands of us. Now, not so much. But so those were some of my memories after camp and during camp.
I don't have a lot of memories. I was too young. I was 20 months old when I was going to camp, and 5 years old when we were released. I do remember just a couple of things. My brothers and I used to get sugar cane. We got it somewhere, and we used to go out of that sugar cane. I used to remember the movie theater. It's an outdoor movie theater. And we used to have mosquitoes all the time, so they would give us lemon, and we'd wipe our face with lemons, and that would help us. Hiroshi Shimizu has really great memories, by the way, since he was really young. The two Japanese Peruvian girls, Hiroshi Fukuda talked about, they did drown in the swimming pool. And one of my brothers told me that they were good friends with one of my sisters. So that's really unfortunate. Today we're talking earlier with Eloy Maoki, who was also in camp with us, Japanese Peruvian. He said that right in the middle of the pool, there was a rope there, so it tells you that it goes to the deeper end, but it actually goes deeper immediately. Again, it wasn't a regular pool, it was a reservoir. So I guess they didn't really think things through when they made that into a pool, but this is how the two Japanese Peruvian girls drowned. After camp, we didn't talk a lot about camp because it wasn't something that we would talk about. Boy Scouts were great. We played basketball. We did all the different things together. Only when we became older, we started to talk a little bit about camp. And now more than ever, it's important for us to tell our stories so that we can pass this on to everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was kind of interested in the development of how you started tying your own personal experience to what's going on today. Like, what made you start thinking of that? Because I think especially for people of your generation who were children in camp, there must have been a long period where you didn't necessarily put two and two together because, they were, your memories might have been vague or confused, or a lot of them were from your parents. And so I was just wondering, like, when did you start was it at the Crystal City pilgrimage or leading up to the Crystal City pilgrimage? Well, I know that Hiroshi Shimizu, you've been a part of the Tule Lake pilgrimage for a long time. So when did you start putting your childhood experience together with things like pilgrimages and tying it to the current situation?
In late 2017, I think, Hiroshi Shimizu said that they're getting together a small pilgrimage for Crystal City. And I said, oh, that's good, I would be interested, so I joined the committee. But the main reason I joined was really to get a better sense of what my parents went through. They really never talked about it. It was only when my mom was in her late 80s, or late 70s, I should say, that I would ask her questions and things, and she would answer answers weren't satisfactory. What I meant by that is, the thinking back in those days were really different than what it is today. It doesn't make sense, some of the things that she said, but later I realized it's just the sign of the time. You just don't think the same back in those days. So so that's how I got interested in the pilgrimage. It really is for the sake of my parents and my family.
As far as the why I became active in regards to the internment camps, well, that's an interesting thing because I think it was 10 years ago or whatever. There was a meeting in Japantown, and the discussion was, should it be referred to as internment camps, or should it be referred to as concentration camps? And at first I was hesitant. Whenever I spoke to people that have asked me about it, I referred to it as internment camp. I was hesitant to refer to it as a concentration camp because he created the Nazi death camps as a concentration camp. Then when it became clear that they're not even, I mean, the Nazi death camps were one thing, but as far as our German, we were in concentration camps. We were taken away, we were put behind barbed wire, under guard. So, and that being, the community was loud and clear. They said it should be called a concentration camp, because that's what it was. And that was one of the things that really stuck in my mind. And also later on in reading more about the camps and the fact that that action was one of the, I read, that one of the darkest periods in American history, that American citizens were taken away, put into these camps. That sparked a light in which, going forward to this Crystal City pilgrimage, I attended the one in March. Shim invited me and said, "Hey, it's a good time to go to Crystal City. You haven't been there since you left camp." And it was. I hadn't gone back to Crystal City since 1947. So after all these years, I went back. And the people I met there and the activists, and what was surprising to me was that the people in charge, or a lot of leadership, they weren't older people. They were mainly, well, a little bit younger than me, several decades younger, maybe 3 or 4 decades younger than me. And that was really encouraging, because that showed me that this protest was taking hold within the community, with younger people, that they had, they had the strength and the courage to carry on. And I think one of the messages that I take away from this, and I think we've all said it, was that we should let history repeat itself. And one of the other points was that when we were taken away, no one spoke up for us. I think I heard that the Quakers did, but essentially, no one in the general community supported us or fought for us. So I think this is our chance to let other people who have been given injustice to let them know that we support them. So I think that's one of my biggest takeaway is that we could support them.
I've been involved with the Tule Lake Committee for about 25 years, working with my mentor from San Jose, Jimmy Amaichi, and my good friend. And a large part of that effort until these last couple of years has been to establish Tule Lake as a national park site, and also to fight the negative connotations that having been in Tule Lake has been imposed on us from the community, largely from the actions of the JBCL. And it's only recently, since the Trump administration, that the issue, to me, of mass detention and separation of families became an issue. Although we've learned that Obama was doing much of the same thing, but I guess not as forcefully, so we didn't know about it. But when it came to the foreground, that's when I became aware that we needed to fight. And it's drawn our community together, and it's amazing.
One thing, I have this, some books that you could, are invited to take home with you. It's called Letter to the President. My father wrote a letter to President Eisenhower with some of the issues regarding incarceration. So as you leave, you're welcome to pick up a book.
Great, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask Emiko, I know, Emiko, you're kind of the same generation. You were in camp as a child. And how does that figure into your involvement with Suit for Solidarity and for making all these wonderful films and really illuminating these little-known stories?
I don't actually know. I think I do these because it's just my way of coping, but I haven't really done a lot of self-analysis. In fact, interviewing them, I completely forgot I was also a child in camp. And so I learned interviewing them about, things about myself. There was some, of course, there were many stories that we couldn't get in, and one that I had actually some images for was, Shim told the story about Reverend Fukuda bringing pillowcases to the swimming pool and filling them with air, and so that it could float around. And there's this one movie called, you saw the beginning of it, Crystal City, and in that there's quite a bit of footage of the swimming pool and with people with pillowcases floating around. So, see, I go, could he really remember that? He's like only 3 years old, but there it was. So among us all, he has the best memory.
Yes.
Yeah, and so for me, these are just journeys into exploring things about myself through these other stories. And then I thought, I don't know where my sister went, but she, now she's gotten all, she plays this sort of, demented grandmother, and she was also at the protests. So she's always been a much more activist person than me. I've sort of just done things behind the scenes.
Thank you. Emiko, could you make the announcement about the Washington, D.C., and then we'll wrap up? Because
it was at the very end of the Suit for Solidarity, and there was similar footage because they were at that same demonstration, and so it'll be Washington, D.C. from the 5th to the 7th. And we're going to try to take, it was all written up there, 125,000 cranes. And we're well on our way. We're getting lots of cranes, and there's a lot of fold-ins and things like that going on. This is what I mean, it sort of turned into this national movement. And they just came back from, what do you call this when you got together? Because they organized a real pilgrimage to Crystal City, and so they were at a report back right before they came here. Tell us a little bit about what happened at that.
Maybe just really briefly.
Yeah, that was earlier today from 1 to 4 o'clock. Basically, we wanted to get input from the people that came and the people that didn't come to better our next pilgrimage. That's it in a nutshell. Really one of the best pilgrimage from everything I've heard. But it was my first pilgrimage.
Okay, well, I want to thank Emiko and to thank the Hiroshi Shimizu, Hiroshi Fukuda, and Kazunaka Newman. Thank you so much. I think that
we still call the movie Three Amigos among ourselves.
And I want to thank Kenji, Taguma, and all the people from Nichi Bei Foundation that put on this wonderful program. And you know, the title of our panel is Lessons for Today, and like I mentioned, I think that some of these lessons are ongoing. And I know that a lot of the people from Sudu, the lesson right now is stop repeating history, and that's a really important message. But I think that because there's so many untold stories and things are coming out that we've never heard of before, I think there are going to be more and more lessons. But what that means is that we have to break down the silence between generations and find out more about what happened before us. We also have to find out what kind of protests and resistance has happened before today. I know that when I was involved in the redress movement, I was surprised to find out that there were Nisei who had protested the camps. So I think that we have to dig deeper and find out more history. And anyway, thank you so much for coming, and